This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Hello and welcome to We All Belong, Voices of Lived Experiences. My name is Carol Merton. I'm delighted that you are joining us here today. We are taping on location in Safe and Sound, and you'll see behind us laundry because we're in the laundry room of Safe and Sound. In this program, our participants are sharing their stories to increase awareness and understanding about the challenges of everyday living and survival. Some of our participants are unhoused and some are at risk of not having a roof over their heads. I thank those support agencies and services who work hard every day to meet people's needs and who have helped in the development of this program. Before I introduce our guests today, I want to let you know that you may from time to time hear some background noise, and that's because behind us is the gathering place for those participants at Safe and Sound who come and go, and this is their place. So we will continue with the interview, and if you happen to hear the background noise, please understand that they're allowing us to share their space. So I am delighted today to welcome Police Chief Craig Ambrose and also Inspector Dave Bishop, who are here to talk about the Owen Sound Police Services and the role of police services with those marginalized and at-risk populations who are unhoused or at risk of being unhoused. We have a list of questions we're going to go through, and these questions have come through the public or identification of concerns, and the police have had the questions in advance, so they are prepared to provide answers. Thank you both very much for being on the program today.
Thanks very much for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Carol.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So did you want me to go directly into the questions, or did you want to say something about how you perceive your role within this particular focus group?
I guess I'll start just by saying, you know, we get a lot of calls and we get a lot of concerns from citizens about homelessness issues and homeless people and the associated contacts that people are having with those individuals downtown, and they're calling the police because we're the ones that are going to come and respond. And really the homelessness issue falls well short before it comes to the police, and we're left with, you know, what are you going to do about it? And I guess the biggest issue for the police is that there are a number of things that have to be done, and there are a number of agencies that have to work together, and there are a number of different levels of government, there are a number of different levels of community agencies that have to work together to come up with a solution. And the police aren't going to, we'll be part of the solution, but we aren't the solution. So, Dave?
No, I agree.
Yeah. So the police are the only service that supports individuals 24/7.
Correct.
The other support services may not always be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, correct?
Correct. In a crisis, I mean, there's always hospital, Grey Bruce Health Sciences, and there's hospital facilities and doctors available for a crisis situation. But if somebody doesn't meet the threshold of, you know, of a mental health crisis, but it still needs some supports,
Yeah.
you know, we have mobile mental health workers, but they're not 24/7. They are only working part of the time, and we will refer them back and we'll follow up with those individuals.
Yeah.
But really, yes, our officers are the ones that are on the front line that have to respond and help in those situations.
So let's start. So I think you've certainly talked about the role of police services in addressing homelessness. However, you mentioned some groups that you work with. Are there other community groups that you might either recommend for people to have access to care that you haven't mentioned already?
So we work really closely with Grey County Housing. We work very closely with CMHA, the Canadian Mental Health Association, Grey Bruce, and we have workers with them who are embedded right into the police and right into our cruisers, as well as the ability to call them out and a referral for anything else like that. We work closely with Grey Booth Health Sciences, obviously, when people are in a crisis and we have to apprehend under the Mental Health Act. We work closely with our emergency services paramedics, and really they're often calling us for assistance in situations because they don't know about dangers and risks to their employees. And I think that's something I'll touch on right now. Everybody says the police shouldn't be doing this job, and it's not the police's role. The alternative is there's nobody doing it, and the alternative is that, other agencies, other services, other locations are trying to set up a non-police response. But the problem is that if there's a risk of danger, anything like that, and we talk to our social partners, our community partners, they're not sending their people into that situation unless the police accompany them anyway.
Yes.
So to have an alternative is great, but in 90% of the calls, they don't know what the situation is presenting. There's very limited information that's coming in, so the police are going to be responding to those calls for service anyway, even if there are other community partners and community agencies there that can help.
So definitely you are the go-to last resort because there's no one else, but also for the safety of those people who would be responding to care. So you have a variety of roles.
Absolutely.
Not just enforcement.
Perfect example of that last year in October, we had an RCMP officer killed, Constable Sheila Yang, out in BC. She was actually one of the mental health support workers working with mental health. They were simply doing tent checks on some of the homeless people to try and do some outreach, and she was unfortunately stabbed to death. So that just kind of highlights the difficulty around that situation, or the talk about, let's remove the police completely from the equation.
Yeah, so there are risks to doing to that concept for sure.
Right.
We talked about what agencies you most commonly work with to address homelessness. So let's get down to the use of drugs. The questions that I sometimes hear is that people use drugs. They use drugs out in the open. People see people using drugs out in the street. And the question is, why isn't the police doing something when people are using out in the street?
Go ahead.
The short version is the federal government's been talking for years about basically legalizing drugs. Although that hasn't been done and taken away from the criminal code, what did happen a couple of years ago is the Ministry of the Attorney General put direction out that they will not be proceeding with charges for simple possession of drugs.
Yeah.
Which puts us in a very difficult situation. And even though it's in the criminal code, we don't arrest for something that we know can't go through the courts. We wouldn't risk getting in a fight or something like that, and an arrest with something we know can never be prosecuted. So ultimately the federal government in some respects has legalized drugs without perhaps going through the politically difficult formality of actually saying they're doing it.
Yeah.
We can't get a simple possession drug charge through the courts. Drug trafficking, sale of drugs still remains illegal, and we do our best to enforce that, but the simple reality of somebody on a bench injecting fentanyl, that's not something we can process in a conventional law enforcement role.
That's absolutely critical, I think, that message to the public. It's not that you're not doing your job. Your job, you can't prosecute or charge someone. And so there's nothing, your hands are tied with that.
Our job has changed.
Yes.
That tool is no longer in the toolbox.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's important for us to be aware of because, it's been removed. That action has been removed from you.
Yeah.
Effectively, without going through a legalization debate and effectively without making a change to the law, it's an abusive process on our part if we go and arrest somebody for a crime that we know we're not going to be able to follow through.
Right.
And so you're exposing yourself to liability.
And I suppose there's two sides to that argument because a lot of people will say that's victimizing people who have addictions issues, but in many cases, I do know that sometimes that was the catalyst, and there are options where people in the court system very often were put into treatment programs that they wouldn't have got into themselves. So I think that piece has been lost, where where we're no longer able to have that for people that, really have no way to get out themselves, and sometimes that was beneficial to them, where as much as it is an arrest process, it was the only process in which you could force somebody into treatment or provide them into directed treatment that they wouldn't have got into themselves.
And in that system, when it existed, would they be prioritized to get treatment then? Because there are waiting lists for treatment programs, correct?
Yes. You are quicker getting into a treatment program that's directed by the courts than trying to get one in from outside of that.
But now, because you're not charged, they're not charged.
There's no referrals happening.
There's no referral, so that option for care is not there.
Now, there are still situations in the courts where if substance use and substance addiction is an issue related to other offenses, not for possession, then that process is still available and still in place.
Right. So that certainly is important for the public to be aware, because the comments are, why can't the police just fix this? We know that they're not supposed to be doing this out in the public. Why can't they just fix this?
Well, I think it comes down to the fact that we're not going to arrest our way out of the issue and arrest our way out of the problem, and that's been apparent throughout the war on drugs, as you want to call it, in the States and everything else, and really it criminalized behavior that's a medical issue. And the problem that I see is it stigmatizes the use of drugs, and the fact that we're not prosecuting anymore for possession should eliminate that stigma, or should reduce that stigma over time.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will allow people to get better opportunities for treatment.
The way you've just described it, people sometimes will say, the police don't get it. They just don't understand. But you get that this is a health-related issue. Addictions is a health-related issue, and that it creates stigma for people, that it's not necessarily an enforcement policing issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't think of the number of people who become drug dependent based on a medical prescription that was given to them by a doctor, and then. I don't know if you've ever seen some of the documentaries on the whole Purdue Pharma and what happened down in the States, but there's some good ones out there, and it was all about marketing this because it was going to make them a lot of money, and they paid out in lawsuits now. But there is victims out there still from that who are still using or dependent, or who are on plans now, opioid maintenance therapy now, because they've been addicted through whatever happened, an accident, an injury, a surgery, whatever that may be, and need that dependence.
Yeah. People don't necessarily always choose to get high on drugs for the sake of getting high. Sometimes the addiction happens because of other reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an extremely complex issue, and in the last number of years, there's been any number of little projects that have happened. There's out in Vancouver, they've tried a whole bunch of different things. Portugal was held out for some period of time as sort of the panacea of how to deal with the drug issue, and now in recent years, we're reading more and more studies, recently coming out of Portugal going, as much as we tried, we realized that this maybe isn't the perfect solution either, and it's all coming back that I'm not sure anybody has the perfect solution, but it's certainly not what we're doing right now.
Right.
Even the results in BC, it's not reducing the deaths. It's not reducing the number of people who are getting involved with substances. It may help somewhat, but it's not reducing those things. And I think when you look at it, I equate it almost to the smoking cessation issues, and it may take a generation. And you have to start with the young people, and you have to explain the circumstances, and you have to remove the stigma, but you also have to make sure that you don't remove the dangers, and you highlight the fact that this is a really difficult situation. There's a lot of complex parts to this, and it's moving. It's figuring that out and moving that so that over time, it improves the situation.
Yep. So certainly, it needs all parties working together, all services, all agencies, all partners, and the government.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Hey, I'm Jay Crawford. And I'm Cedric Gano. And make sure you tune in on Attack Rap every week on Rogers TV to make sure you know what's going on with your Owen Sound Tech.
Why can't the police take people off the streets who are homeless and causing a disturbance?
Causing a disturbance is a criminal offense, and it allows for some action to be taken there, but homelessness is not, it's not an offense. It's not an offense to be homeless. You know, I know one of your questions a little bit further down is with respect to how is it that we can just let people put a tent up anywhere or camp anywhere they want. And that really goes back to, I believe it's about a 2018 BC Supreme Court case. So in most municipalities, that would be dealt with by way of a bylaw, which it was either Surrey or Burnaby out in BC had, and we're using that as a means of moving people along and laying charges in relation to that. And that went right up to the BC Supreme Court. And ultimately what it said is, if you don't have a solution, in other words, if you don't have a place for them to go, you can't say they can't go anywhere. Because of it's not their fault in many cases. So the way a lot of municipalities have started, especially recently, trying to address that a little bit more is by setting aside areas where they are, in terms of trying to control, instead of having everybody everywhere in every park and every municipal area, to set aside some reasonable space where it's allowed, and maybe they can put in porta potties, and there's benefits to congregation in terms of being able to offer medical services and that sort of thing. So that's the short version, is there really is no legal background to be able to tell somebody. Mind you, if somebody sets up camp in your backyard, that's very much different. That's trespassing. But in terms of public spaces, municipal spaces and that sort of thing, Harrison Park, places like that, there really isn't a legal background or a legal support system to be able to say no to that.
Yeah. So if they're in a privately owned property, then you can take action because it's trespassing. But basically, encampments are not illegal in where we are now?
They're still going to be illegal, and they're still going to be breaching bylaws, and obviously we'll work with we do a lot of work with people now. Like we do a lot of interactions at the encampments. Our core officers, our community services officer, we go with our partners and we try and come up with alternatives and safe alternatives. And you know, in the fall, we do a lot of work in the fall when it starts to get cold, to make sure that people have alternatives and people are aware of what their situation is and what they can do, and put them in contact with people at you know, the Grey County Housing, and make sure that they are aware and they can have some supports. But it's not that it isn't illegal. It's as Dave said, we have to work and come up with some creative solutions and identify what that looks like.
Yeah. In other words, you can't just scoop them away unless you offer them options for housing or care.
Correct. And that's what we try to do, is try to find alternatives. And that's where we work, as the chief said, very closely with a lot of our support services.
So again, your focus is service, community service, and helping the most vulnerable and marginalized, not enforcing or punishing unless they trespass or absolutely break the law.
And the reality for what you're talking about in terms of trespassing tickets and those sorts of things is it really is a monetary fine, and a monetary fine that really has no teeth in terms of other than being a barrier, because they'll just keep accumulating fines. There's no jail time associated any longer.
And they have no money to pay for the fine anyway.
So all it does is keep accumulating. It may prevent them from getting a driver's license down the road when there's unpaid fines and things like that. But there is no, there's no facility to put somebody in jail because they weren't able to pay their homelessness fine, if you want to call it that.
That's an interesting homelessness fine, when you think about it.
And the biggest thing is when somebody is ready to move on, it's a huge barrier to that individual,
because it stops that recovery.
It puts a big barrier up to the recovery and up to moving on and getting back in their life, because, well, I can't do that because I have this hanging over my head.
And I was aware at one time of a social agency that was providing funding to pay for those tickets, so it really comes full circle when you go, here we are essentially paying off our own fines through either taxation grants or donation money for something we thought we were
Yeah. That sort of goes around the circle, doesn't it? But doesn't really address
Correct.
the key issue. So we see lots of people downtown sitting on the entrances to buildings or lying on the sidewalk and begging for money. We don't feel safe. What are the police doing about this? And we do hear that a fair amount, especially in downtown.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I guess some of it is a perception of safety as opposed to an actual safety concern. But if you have a perception of safety, you're not going to go there,
Right.
and you're going to be hesitant to spend your time there. I mean, we've increased our proactive patrols in the city.
Yeah.
Dave wrote a very successful grant for core funding for 3 years, covering 2 officers in the vehicle to expand our opportunities working downtown and in dealing with these types of situations that the taxpayer doesn't have to pay for. Now, that being said, all good things come to an end, and we have to figure out how we're going to move forward with that. But those are the types of things that we have tried to increase our presence. We encourage our officers to get out on foot and walk and be seen and visible and interact with the individuals. I would hazard a guess to say that in Owen Sound, our officers, they know 90% of the people that they're dealing with, and coming from larger services where nobody knew anyone, and there was an anonymity to crime. It was a big shock when you came here, and everybody knows everybody, and our officers know everybody that they're dealing with downtown. So a lot of times they can go and interact and talk to the individual and ask them to move along and ask them, what they're doing, and explain this isn't good behavior, and talking to yourself and acting out and things isn't necessarily causing a disturbance. It can cross the line. It can lead to a cause disturbance, but then you're criminalizing that behavior again. And what are you accomplishing? And sometimes you have to follow through, and you have to do that. But a lot of times it's talking people down, calming them down, and making sure that they're aware of how their actions are affecting others. And some of them are very good about that.
So what's the difference between lingering and loitering? I don't know if I put that in one of my questions, but sorry about that. But
then I guess it's Dave's question.
I don't know that there is.
I don't know that there is.
To that.
okay.
Okay. Maybe one way to look at this too is in any community, and this is kind of big picture and more systemic, but every community has the potential to have people that are marginalized living in it. Some communities end up aggregating because of some different factors that will kick in. If you have Grey County Housing, for example, and they have a limited amount of budget to spend on housing, they will try and make the best use of their funding and try and find the area where housing pricing is cheapest, sort of thing. So what that tends to do is people that are in need of housing tend to get aggregated in certain areas. So if it's very expensive to live in Collingwood, for example, and it costs twice as much to get an apartment there as it does in Owen Sound, it would make sense from their perspective to maximize their funding. When we have services here, some of the 24/7 services, the methadone clinic, the hospital, all of those sorts of things, what tends to happen is people that are in need of those services come to the location where it's available. So what ends up happening is some communities and municipalities end up with a higher percentage of homelessness and marginalized issues. And if you were to walk in a large center and see 1 or 2 homeless people, it doesn't dawn on you. It's just something that you saw. If you see 15 or 20 or 30, then all of a sudden that's a declining, it strikes you as, being much more of a problem and being available to you. So I don't know what the solution is to that, but again, it probably is some version of provincial intervention where we look at being able to spread those services out so that there's a fair distribution. And each community has to have the services to look after their own and to be able to provide those services in the community without necessarily having to have people leave the community to get them.
And one of the issues that I see from the policing side of things is that, as Dave said, there's a reason that people are concentrated in Owen Sound, in the city of Owen Sound. Opportunities for housing, opportunities for those services, the supports that the people need, being able to come to a place like Safe and Sound that isn't available in other locations, coming and having share and having a meal and being, having the opportunity for a free meal in the evening. So they're here and they stay here. They congregate here from all around the community because this is where the supports are. That's fine, and their support those other agencies are supported at different levels. But the policing and the cost of policing and the cost of dealing with the social side of that all comes from the taxpayer of the City of Owen Sound. And so is there a different type of situation on funding that says, we have some of these problems, we have some of these issues, and the demands on policing are increased with those individuals, and it's not, and I'm not saying it's the individuals that are causing the demand for policing.
No.
What I will say is from a 2019 Justice Canada study, if you are homeless, if you're homeless, you're 5 times more likely to be the victim of a violent incident. If you suffer from drug dependency and substance abuse disorder, you're 4 times more likely. And if you have mental health disabilities, you're 3 times more likely to be a victim. So these people aren't necessarily causing the problems or causing the issues, but there's a demand for service as a result of the fact that they're victimized at a higher rate.
So being homeless creates marginalization and vulnerability, which in turn makes them even more victims.
Absolutely.
More than those who are housed.
Absolutely.
Which then increases demand for services, for the police services. I'm getting the high sign from the producer. He's waving the broom, but I need to ask him to show, does that mean I've got 5 minutes, 3 minutes, or 1 minute? Holy moly, our time has gone by fast. I want to thank both of you for being on the program. I don't know that we got to the end of the questions, but the information that you've shared has been so helpful, so thank you. And thank you for what you're doing out there to support this marginalized and vulnerable community. Thank you to our viewing audience for joining us today for the program We All Belong, Voices of Lived Experiences. Please join us again to learn more about this and what can be offered to help those in our community who need our assistance. Take care and stay safe. Thank you.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
It's Wednesday Night Hockey.
The ultimate midweek showdown here on Sportsnet.
Here we go.
Hockey's best go head-to-head, featuring division rivalries that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Scotiabank Wednesday Night Hockey on Sportsnet.
Are you here for the full 60 minutes?
I'm here for that, and maybe some overtime.
Sportsnet Plus. Stream live games, NHL highlights, and more. Sign in with your TV service provider or subscribe at sportsnetplus.ca.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host of Attack Rap, Nick Kennedy. Want to wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, a Happy New Year as well. We'll be back with Attack Rap in the